G'day and welcome back. So this is actually my first video done exclusively for my YouTube channel. All of my previous ones were all done through for my Patreon when I had my Patreon last year. So I thought I'd give it a fresh start. So did you like my new epic intro music? That'll be on all of my videos now for the time being. I might change it up from time to time, but so today we're going to be talking about airbrushes and air compressors. I get many people contacting me saying, which airbrush should I get? What's the best one? What's the best air compressor? Brands, different types of compressors. So I thought that I would make this video going over pretty much just hardware. I'm not going to get into painting techniques so much today. I'll do a separate video for that. But today we're going to talk about air compressors, the different types you can get, different sort of price points that you're looking at, why you would choose different compressors, and also airbrushes, different types of airbrushes, how to pull them apart, how to put them back together, how to clean them, when you would use certain different types of airbrushes, and hopefully it will spare me having to have that conversation 100 more times, so I can just refer people to this video. So I hope it's enjoyable to you, I hope it's informative, and got a lot of information to get to, so let's get started. Okay, so when discussing air compressors, there's a few different things that we need to look at. So these are the ones we're going to be sort of looking at today. So we've got 4, and the things that we need to bear in mind are obviously budget. That will affect a lot of people, and we need to consider power, what exactly it's going to need to be doing. We need to talk about noise, you know, how noisy they are, how loud they are, because depending on what you're doing, it may not be suitable, and weight. So they're the things that I kind of factor in. So our first little guy today that we're going to look at is this central pneumatic one. So if let's turn it on, see how it sounds. So you can see that's pretty quiet. It's not too bad. Certainly usable in a classroom or in some kind of a salon type setting. If you're going to be doing face painting, it's not going to be too loud to be able to talk to the kids. If you're going to be working in an apartment, it's not going to disturb your neighbours. These types of things are important. So that's not too bad. So let's break it down and see all the different elements here. So first of all, you can see it's got a handle, which most compressors have. This part down here is the motor, and that's what drives the compressor. This here is the piston. So the piston kind of goes up and down really fast, kind of like bellows, and that's what pumps the air out. So the motor drives the piston, and then the piston pushes the air out through here. This is what's called a moisture trap. So what happens is anytime you have air in any kind of confined space, tubes, hoses, lines, tanks, those types of things, if there is this discrepancy between the outside temperature and the temperature inside, which is usually warmer because of the motor, then you get condensation. It's the same as if you're driving in your car and it's raining and cold outside, but it's warm inside your car. The inside of your car, the windows fog up and they get condensation on them. It's the same exact phenomenon. So what this does is rather than blow the water into your air hose line so it comes out with your paint and wrecks your paint job, this will catch the moisture in here, and then every once in a while you're just going to need to sort of empty it out by lifting this little doodad at the bottom. Sometimes it's a lift, sometimes it's a twist, depends on what you're doing. And then if you look on the top, we've got a gauge, and that gauge tells us what pressure that is coming out of the the air compressor. So if you're working with body painting, makeup, that type of thing, you certainly don't want to have it above sort of 30 to 40 psi, the absolute maximum 40. I would tend to keep it more around the 30 to 35. When you come up onto the face, you're going to really want to push that right back down to like 5, maybe 10 at the most, but try and keep it around the 5 to 7 mark around the face, just because it becomes a little strong in the face. So this little guy here, we get him from Harbor Freight. I think he retails at around about 75 bucks. And I've used these many times. If I'm going to do something somewhere within the United States and I can't travel with my travel one because I don't have enough weight, in my case, I'll just go and buy one of these when I get there. They're cheap, they last pretty well, and they have a lifetime replacement warranty at Harbor Freight. So that's a good little first compressor. You can buy them for I think about 90 bucks with an airbrush and some hoses and stuff. So they certainly have cheap stuff, and it's affordable, and yeah, it's a pretty good one. Now we'll move on to this one. Now this is the one that I use for traveling. I've had a few of these. These are really good. I like these a lot. Part of the problem with a single piston is that if you're doing it for body painting, you're going to find that it will overheat pretty fast because it'll be on all the time. There's no tank on either of these two. You'll notice that there's no real place for them to fill up with air and then draw from that. So these are running the whole time that we're airbrushing. Once you stop airbrushing, they typically shut off unless there's a leak somewhere, and then they'll keep running. But typically they will shut off when you're not airbrushing. So this one here has the motor, again, has the motor, no tank. This one is a dual piston, so it has 2 pistons. And what I like about that is if I'm doing it for body painting where I'm going to be running it for several hours straight, having the dual pistons kind of halves the load off the single piston. So a single piston will overheat pretty easily, whereas a dual piston won't overheat nearly as easily. So we've got that. We've got our water trap and moisture trap on this, and we have, if you look there, we've got our gauge, but this one has the addition of this knob up here. Now what this does, you can lift it up and you can twist it and actually change your air pressure, which is great. And then to lock it, you push it down again. I have also added myself this little quick connect triple manifold. Again, I get these at Harbor Freight, and they're quite cheap. This particular compressor is made by Pache, I believe, and it retails for around about $300. So it's not super cheap, but it weighs 10 pounds, so it's not incredibly heavy to travel with. And if we turn it on, a little bit louder than our other one, but still not terrible. It's perfectly fine for, you know, obviously if it's not on the table's making it sound a lot louder, but we got that one. So it's a good little one for, you know, if you need kind of a workhorse that you're going to be traveling a lot. It's fairly small. It's not terribly much bigger than our other little guy here, and so that's a good one. I like those ones a lot. Okay, up next, this is my main workhorse that I have at my studio, and most airbrushing that I do at my studio is done with this particular compressor. So you can see when I turn it on, it's got a little bit of a leak because there's nothing plugged into it, but you can hear it's almost perfectly silent, which is one of the things I love about this compressor. I've had this one now for over 15 years, and it cost, I believe, about $500. So it was quite an investment, but it has more than made up for it. It's by Badger, and I can run 10 airbrushes on this easily. It is pretty good pretty good. It does weigh 45 pounds, so not good for traveling. If I'm traveling in my car, I will actually use this one. But if I'm traveling on a plane, then I typically take my dual piston. So this one here also, if we turn it around, you can see that it actually has a tank, and so the motor and the compressor will fill the tank and store some there so that the motor isn't running the whole time, and that also takes a lot of the sort of pressure off the motor in that particular compressor. And so that's a very good one. I know that Iwata makes one that's very similar to this one, and a lot of the ones you'll see in these kind of sort of little metal boxes, if you look inside them, you'll see that quite a few of them will be a tank, and then it'll have something like this sitting on top of the tank, and then the whole thing will be sort of hidden with the shield, which looks much nicer than just having kind of a mess. But all of the compressors have the same things. This one also, if we look at it, it has the moisture trap on the front here. You can't see it. Moisture trap. And it has the regulator here with the knob on the side, and then the on-off switch there. Okay, now onto this big boy in the back. Now this one here is a 26-gallon tank, so it holds a lot of air, and this is good for if you're wanting to use something that requires quite a strong amount of constant air. Some cup guns and detail guns will require a constant of 50 psi the whole time. Now psi stands for pounds per square inch, and it's the amount of pressure that comes out with the air. So if you're using a cup gun, it needs to constantly have that constant 50 psi the whole time, otherwise it'll give you a burst of paint and then die down, and you won't be able to maintain a good spray volume. So this one here, if we turn it on, obviously that's not good to be using if you're around a lot of people, or if you're going to be talking, or whatever. It's quite obnoxious and loud, but it does put out a lot of air, and I can run a whole class worth of airbrushes off that. I used to have this set up in one of my old shops with a large manifold that went all around the room, and all my students could just plug straight into that, and I would have that off in the other room so it wasn't really noisy. And so this one here I think was about $200. Got that at a hardware store. I think it was Home Depot. Yeah, for what it is, it's pretty good. You can get a long hose, put it outside, run your cup gun in. We'll talk about cup guns when we get into airbrushes, but that is compressors. So let's talk about when you would want to use each one. So as I said, this big one here, that one you can run many airbrushes at the same time off. If you want to run a team, you could certainly run a team of makeup artists on that one compressor at the back. But those ones you get from the hardware store typically are very loud, so you need to bear that in mind. That is one of the downfalls of them. They are relatively cheap compared to something like our Badger friend here, but you do get the benefit of having virtually no sound whatsoever out of that one. So it really depends on what you're after. So this one here, I would use that if I was going to be working a big body paint job where I was going to be painting for 8-10 hours, as long as I could drive there. I can run multiple guns off it. It's very good, and it's very quiet. This one here I use when I'm traveling. If I need to pack it in my suitcase, I can wrap it in a towel. It is relatively quiet and puts out a lot of air, so it's a pretty good one. and then that little guy there is for just light airbrushing needs, and it's, you know, a bit more of a budget friendly option. So that's our compressors and everything that goes into them. If you've got any questions on those, pop them down in the comments below, and I'll be able to answer those. So now let's move on to airbrushes. Before we get into airbrushes, I want to talk about this guy. This is called a cup gun. This is not something that you'll use all the time. In fact, I don't use this very often at all. It's great for painting furniture, it's great for painting walls. I painted my car with one, so very handy. It's also great for basing out bodies. I can base a full body in under 2 minutes with one of these. It does require a compressor that can sustain the amount of constant airflow on it, but it is very handy to have. This has something that airbrushes don't have, and that's this head assembly here. You notice that this little bit spins. If you look closely, there's a little hole here and a little hole here, and that blows air. So the paint comes out and it forms like a fan of paint. So you can do it so that it does a wide burst this way or a wide burst going this way, depending which way you're painting. Other than that, it has pretty much all the same elements as an airbrush, except it's a trigger rather than a little thingy on top, and it works pretty great. I love these a lot, and you can buy these ones from Harbor Freight pretty cheap. I think it's about 30 bucks for one of these, and yeah, I recommend at least having one of these. If you're going to be painting a lot of bodies in a short amount of time, you can knock them out fast with one of these, and they work great. So now that we've covered that, let's get on to airbrushes. Alrighty, airbrushes. So we've got all these different various types. I don't have a sexy program to do computer generated graphics, so I'm having to do this the old school way with handouts. So excuse my old schoolness of this, but we'll still get through the information that we need. So we've got the left column and the right column. So this is different options. You can't have something from the same next to it. So you can either have a single action airbrush or you can have a dual action airbrush, but you can't have a single action dual action. You can have a gravity feed or you can have a siphon feed, but you can't have both. You can have an internal mix or you can have an external mix, but you can't have an internal-external mix. At least I've never seen one. If it exists, I don't know. It makes no sense if it does. So you can have a single action siphon feed internal mix, or you can have a single action siphon feed external mix. You can have a dual action gravity feed internal mix. So you can mix and match them, but you can't have anything that's right next to each other. So there's any various combination of those that you want. So what are the differences between these? So let's look at that. So here is a very simple depiction of an airbrush. So this would be for a gravity feed where the paint goes in the top. So a gravity feed would look like this. It has the paint receiver on the top, paint goes in, cap goes on, and then gravity puts it down and it blows out. So that would be what that represents. This part down here would represent if we were having a siphon feed. And what a siphon feed is like this. So it has, you can pop a bottle on the bottom of it. So you can get a bottle, paint goes in the bottle goes into the receiver, and then the paint comes out of there and up into there. So that's a siphon feed or a bottle feed. So I put those two on there just to illustrate, you know, those two things. This is the opening for the paint to come out. This would be the cone and then the body of the airbrush there. The needle would go in through here. Now, this represents the needle. You can see that when the needle is all the way into the airbrush, there is nowhere for the paint to come out. It blocks that whole opening. And then as the needle starts to come back, it slowly opens and slowly opens and slowly opens and gets more and more and more space. So the further back the needle comes, the more paint will flow out of there. So a single action airbrush only has the ability for the trigger on the top, the button on the top, just goes up and down. That's it. And that's your air. That regulates your airflow. So the further down you go, the more air flows out of that. Now, if you want to adjust how much paint goes out, you have to pull the back off and manually set the needle. So if you want only a little bit of paint, you would set it to there, screw it on, and then that would be always the amount of paint that came out until you reset it. So that's a single action airbrush. A dual action airbrush has the ability to be able to have the air up and down, but it can also pull back. And when that pulls back, it actually pulls this needle in and out. So you can actually move the needle as you're regulating your airflow. And so you can get some really nice fades from very, very fine lines to fat lines in one fluid motion. So that's kind of how an airbrush works. The air comes up, comes through here. If it's a gravity feed, it just automatically mixes in just because gravity will push the paint down. If it's a siphon feed, it creates a suction that actually pulls the paint up. Now this represents an internal mix airbrush. That is where the air and the paint mix inside the airbrush and blow out the gun. There is something called an external mix. And what that looks like is this little fella here. So you can see it's got this weird cone. The bottle goes on here. So we pop that bottle on. Okay, bottle goes on like that. And then the air comes up through here. You regulate how much air comes, and then it comes through here, and this creates the suction here, which blows the paint up through this cone, and it never actually, the paint never goes inside of the airbrush. So they're the different types of airbrushes. So let's go back to our list again, and we can talk about what each one does. Most makeup artists will use a dual action airbrush. In fact, I don't think that really, apart from this one, I don't have a single action airbrush. And a lot of people will like the Pache H's. They're a single action. They're good for blowing very viscous fluids. They have quite a large opening, and they can blow. You know, if you're doing a lot of silicone work or painting with something that's a little thicker, it's very good for that type of work. And the single action also can be good if you're wanting to have it set at, like, if you want a veining pattern that's very, very regular, you can set it at that, and then you can't accidentally pull back. It'll just be that same amount of paint the whole time. You can adjust it, the width, by going in and out, because the further away you are, obviously, the wider the spray will be. So you can adjust it that way. So when would you use gravity feed and siphon feed? Well, personally, gravity feeds are great for stuff where you are not really rushed. You can change out your paint, because to change your color, you're going to have to pull the cap off. You have to clean this all out, spray it out with alcohol, pour in the new paint color, close it up, and then you're good to go. Whereas with a siphon feed, you're able to just kind of plug and play. Just fill up a bunch of bottles, put it in, blast it out a little bit, and you're good to keep going. So if I'm working on something like our show in Hong Kong, where I'm running 8 airbrushes, I have something like 18 different colors, I'm going to use these. because I can change out my colors much faster with these. The problem that I don't like with these is I hate cleaning bottles, like hate cleaning bottles. So that's why I like these ones, because it's much easier just to clean out this and flush it through with some alcohol than it is to get in here and clean out your stem and clean out your stem, get all up in here, clean that out, get in here, get in up around these lip. It really sucks cleaning airbrush bottles. So that's why I tend to use my gravity feed for just my regular run-of-the-mill makeup work or painting or body painting. I'll use these a lot. If I need to do a lot of stuff, if I was doing some kind of a fair where I was doing temporary tattoos and I wanted to run a bunch of colors, I would do this. So these are good if you're needing to change colors fast, or if you've got high volumes. You can get quite large bottles that fit under there and you don't have to refill them. These don't hold so much paint, so you're going to be refilling these a lot. That becomes problematic and a bit of a pain. So that's the main difference between those two there. Now, internal mix and external mix, you're going to find that probably 95% of the airbrushes you come across are internal mix. They look like this. They've got the, obviously the one little hole that the paint and air both comes out of. And to clean it, you've got to pull it all apart. And it can be a pain if you're shooting something through it like PAX paint, which is colored glue. If you're doing something that's going to be tricky to clean out, then these guys are your best friend, because all you have to do is just take the little cone out, and it's much easier just to clean that little cone out than to try and get all up in here with the alcohol and the remover and get all of the glue and all of the other bits and pieces out of it. So that's where your internal mix and your external mix come in handy. These also can blow slightly more viscous fluids as well. So hopefully that helps you out and gives you a basic rundown on the different types of airbrushes. So now we're going to pull an airbrush apart. They all typically have the same parts. Some of them look a little different, but they're all typically the same components that make up an airbrush. And so let's do that. Now, anytime that I want to pull apart my airbrush, I always put down a towel. It can be a regular cloth towel or some paper towel. I like something like paper towel because it's a little more flat. Sometimes if you get like a really large sort of thick pile towel, it'll cause problems. Stuff will fall off it or whatever, just because it can get lost. You can forget it's in there and lift it up and it'll fall on the floor and lose it. Some of these parts are quite small, so this is the one we're going to pull apart right now. This is an Iwata Eclipse. So I'm an Iwata fan. I like Iwata airbrushes. The main ones that they have are this one here is an Iwata Revolution. This one usually comes with a different back on it. It usually has a solid back, but I've changed them out so I can access the thing here. These retail around about $90. They're one of the lower end of the Iwata line. They work pretty well, and when we pull them apart, I'll tell you what I don't like about these. This is the Iwata Eclipse. It's probably their main workhorse. Most of the airbrushes you get, if you're going to be working in different makeup departments for makeup, will be an Iwata Eclipse. That's what I've found over the years of working in different departments. So we'll pull this one apart. The other one I've got is this one here, which is my favorite. This is an Iwata Micron, and this is a very the Eclipse will retail around about $160 if you get the gravity feed, or if you get the siphon feed. I believe they're around about $125. So they're a little more expensive than these. Not terribly, but a little bit more. The Micron is designed for very fine detail airbrushing. You can regulate some paint flow issues here. There's usually a thing in the back, I've lost it, which will allow you to, adjust how far back you can pull your trigger, and has a very, very fine cone, very fine needle, and is for the sort of fine detail work. These retail anywhere from $350 to $500 regularly, and they're very, very nice. If you do a lot of airbrushing, you should really save up and get one of these, because they are absolutely wonderful. So we'll pull the back off here, and that shows us this little part here. Now, I don't know what this is called. I just call it the acorn because it looks like an acorn, but I'm sure it's got like a different name. And then that releases our needle. What that does is this part here travels. As we push back, you can see that that's the part that moves. And what this little acorn does is when we screw it down, it actually clamps onto the needle. So the needle actually, that's what moves the needle as we pull it back. So if we release that, now the needle doesn't move. So sometimes when you pull back, you want to check this to make sure that's tightened down, because sometimes if no paint's coming out, it's just because that hasn't been tightened down. So we're going to remove the needle, put it here, put that here. Now this part here, this little part that screws here, will actually it's a tensioner. So the further in it goes, the more tension you have on your trigger, the more difficult it is to pull back. If you have it really, really loose, this becomes very, very floppy, because inside here is a spring, and it tensions that spring down. So as you can see right there. And so that is what creates the tension on this. Some people like it really floppy, so there's no resistance at all. Other people like to really have, you know, a lot of resistance, because they can get a little bit more precision with that. So that becomes a personal preference. So we pull this out. This is the skid plate. I don't know what the real name for it is, but as that moves back, that little skid plate sort of follows the angle. You can see that angles quite a bit as you pull it back. So this here will adjust to whatever angle this is to adjust this back and forth. This here is the trigger. It has a little pin that goes in it, and that goes down into the air valve, and that's what pushes the air valve down in there. Now this part here is the air valve, and if I get the back of the needle, you can kind of see how that comes in and out. So as the little part on the end of the trigger goes in, as you push the trigger down, you can see that it will open and close that little air valve there. We have the front, the head assembly. This very front part is called the needle guard, and let me see if I can get it off. It's tightened down pretty good. No, that's not going to want to come off. Let me grab it off this one. Okay, so this is your needle guard. So what that does is it actually protects the needle. You'll see some of mine are kind of dinged up and not very round. That's from dropping the airbrush down, and it protects it from bending your needle. It also protects people's faces from the needle. There's this particular brand here. This is a Badger Anthem, and I don't know if you can see that, but the needle actually sticks out past the needle guard, which I don't love about that. That's one of the things I really don't like about this particular airbrush. You do get a lot of range. You know, you can do some very, very fine stuff and some broad, blow a lot of paint with these. They have a great range, but I don't like that the needle sticks out the end of that, especially if you're working close up to someone's skin. I don't love that. Okay, let's put that back on so we don't lose it. And this is the head assembly here. And then this is the cone, which is kind of stuck in there because I haven't really cleaned this airbrush for quite some time. So need to be careful that we're not going to damage it, but that is really in there. I'm going to need to soak that to get that out. So this is all the parts all pulled apart from that, which for some reason won't open. Maybe the paint has dried in there. It's been a while since I've used this particular airbrush. It's been about 7 months and I didn't really clean it that well back then. So let's give this a clean. So what I normally like to do is to just grab a cup. It doesn't have to be this big. I like them a little larger because I can put a little more alcohol in them and really soak the... And this is just isopropyl alcohol. And let's go ahead and just put that in there. See if we can't... we want to be really careful not to dent the end of your thing, so I'm just kind of sloshing it around inside the alcohol without it touching the bottom, because my main objective is to loosen that paint up so we can actually get this off. There we go. So there's the cone. So obviously there was some dried paint that was kind of sticking it to your airbrush. So I'm just going to shove that in there and let that soak. So now we have these couple of little things here. We have these what look like little pipe cleaner brushes. You can buy these from various art stores and companies. And we also have this little fella here, which has a variety. They're like tiny little needle-like things. They're not sharp, but they've got these very fine serration on them, so that you can get in and kind of work off some paint if it's dried up on certain areas a little thicker. Especially good for trying to clean out these cones. So I'm just going to kind of soak this in there a little bit, give it somewhat of a wipe off. This is usually pretty clean inside here because it's really only air that goes in there. The paint goes through the inside of the airbrush and then the cone, which actually comes through here. So this one is usually pretty clean. Just trying to get some of this built up paint off. It's so just gonna give this a bit of a soak. You can use a Q-tip. I don't have any of them here with me right now. The Q-tips work pretty well as well. So I'm just going to wad that up into here, and you can see that that's got quite a bit of paint off there. Okay, so you can see that that's substantially cleaner, and I'm just going to shove that down in there to try and get rid of some of that paint buildup that's there. Cone, I'm just going to have to get the smallest one of these, which probably this one. Just going to kind of give it a good clean out. Now you want to be super careful with your cone. If your cone cracks, it'll spray your paint out and you'll end up with like a calligraphy pen, because where the crack is will spray your paint, so you won't get a nice fine spray. It'll be like a flathead marker, so you won't be able to get any good detail with it at all. And also if you bend the tip of your airbrush, the needle, the same thing happens. So I'm just going to grab the smallest one of these and just give it a little. Here's what I'm going to say that's done. This one here, again we just need to get whichever one's going to, there we go. Get a good clean. And I'll get the bigger one out to sort of clean this out a little bit. And the needle's a little dirty still, so I'm just going to give it a little dip in here. Just wipe it down. Just really be careful with the tip. You do not want to bend that tip. It will give you a lot of regret. Okay, so now we're ready to reassemble. So first I'll put the head together. So the thing I like about these is that these cones just kind of sit in like that, and then you put the head assembly on. Give that a little bit of a tighten. There we go. Then the where are you? Pop it in there? Yes, I did. Okay. Nope, that's absolutely not gonna. Oh, there we go. Soaking it did the trick. Okay. So. Back on. Now, if you look really carefully here, I know you can't see it on this particular video, but the cone sticks out just the tiniest little bit. So you want to be really careful not to drop that or ding it with something that's gonna bend it. And then we put our needle guard on. Okay. Next we put in our trigger. Now, if you look underneath, at least on the Iwata ones, you'll see that there's an end that's got an indent and a side that doesn't. And if you look in the middle, you'll see that it's hollow. Now that hollow part is where the needle actually feeds through. So you want to make sure that that's facing front and back, and this little area that's cut out is the back, so that when we pull it back it doesn't hit the airbrush. It gives just a little bit of extra room for it, so that it has a little bit of extra travel. So this needs to go down into the air valve. Okay, and you want to check it just by pushing up and down to make sure that you can get that up and down motion. Next we put in our skid plate with this thing that holds the needle. So that goes in there with that little hat, the little skinny part that comes through that hole where the trigger goes. Then we pop on the spring. Then we put this tensioner on, and that screws in. Now you'll notice on that goes into the same thread as this. So if we leave it kind of really loose, then this will only screw in a certain amount because it's sharing the same thread. So I always like to screw it in at least a little bit because I don't like having a big gap there. But that's just me, I'm kind of neurotic like that. Then we carefully, very, very carefully, put the needle back in. If I can, there. Now you don't want to just jam it in, because if it goes in crooked and hits the side of this trigger, you can bend your needle tip. And we put that in till it's firm. Don't try and force it further because you'll flare the cap of the tip of your cone. And then this gets clamped on there. Make sure that it's all working well. Okay. Then this goes on like so. And we're clean and ready to use. Now, I was talking about the Revolution, and one of the things I don't like about the Revolution, and that is that it has this particular cone here. Now the cone for the Revolution screws in, and it is, let me pull the needle out. It is that tiny weeny little thing in the palm of my hand there is the cone for the Revolution, and they cost $25 to replace. So if you lose it, you're screwed. What I've had happen to me a couple times is I've had some interns cleaning my airbrushes, and they'll go to put this back in, and goes in fine. Then you got to screw it down, and what they do is they over screw it, rip the tip of the cone off, and leave the thread inside. So then my airbrush is ruined and I have to throw it away. I've tried drilling it out to back it out, and it's jacked it up every time. So don't over tighten these cones. It's a similar one that you get to the Micron. It's very, very similar. So don't over tighten them, because it will ruin your airbrush if you tear off the cone, the tip of the cone. So that's the one thing I don't love about the Revolutions. They give you a cheaper airbrush, but the parts are more expensive. I guess that's what they figure, they make their money on that way. Now I'll talk a little bit about this one here. This is the Pro Air airbrush, and this is actually pretty good. I believe these ones, the gravity feeds are about $60. The siphon feeds, I believe, are about $40. I've used these quite a few times. I like them a lot. They're quite responsive. They do a pretty nice job, and for $40 or $60, it's a pretty good price. And so if you're looking to get into a cheap airbrush that does a fairly good job, fairly solid job, I would recommend starting off with one of these, and you can't really go wrong with that. They work out pretty well, especially if you're looking to get quite a few of them to do some temporary tattoos or something like that. So that's pretty much everything about airbrushes. If you've got any more questions, or if I forgot to mention something, pop it down in the comments, and I'll answer your questions as best I can. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.